you, Alex. Great to be back. I think this is the perfect talk to follow what we just heard from Jason Blum. These are today's entrepreneurs and storytellers shaping the world as we speak. As Alex said, this session is called Diversify, Pivot, Innovate, New Strategies for Storytellers. We have 3 great storytellers with us. I'm really glad they could join us. We are welcoming Joanne Rey, who is a producer and writer known for films like Mind Gamers and Gallow Walker. She also has a background in TV, and she has directed her first feature during lockdown called This is the Night Mail, which we'll be hearing about. And she's also an author, I believe. So welcome, Joanne. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Second up, we have Naysun Alae Carew, who is managing director at Blazing Griffin, which is a Glasgow-based company working across film, TV, video games, also production, post-production, and he has worked on films including Anna and the Apocalypse. Thank you for joining us, Naysun. Last but not least, my old friend Shola Amoo, who is a wonderful British filmmaker who has made the feature films A Moving Image and The Last Tree. The latter was called The British Moonlight, no less than The Guardian, I believe. You can watch both those films on Netflix right now. He's also worked in shorts, VR, theater, now working on a BBC drama as well, I believe. So we've got some amazing creative powerhouses here. I know a lot of creative storytellers are watching as well. So I would like to say, please do, at any point, put questions up, feedback. We'll try to make this as interactive as possible. I'd like to start with a big question, of the obvious question. You know, do you all think you are working in innovative ways? Joanne, let's start with you.
I think there's 2 aspects to innovation. One is, as filmmakers, how we can adapt to the stories that we choose to tell in the environment that we're in. We all have our passion projects. We all have a stockpile of ideas, either a metaphorical or a literal shoebox under the bed full of stories that we want to tell. And there's always those stories which capture our imagination and that are the ones that are driving us. It may be now in this environment that we have to be far more pragmatic about which stories we allow ourselves to become passionate about. You know, before lockdown happened, I was pursuing a Gothic Western. And I had finance out of Perfect Village, a Chinese company, and we were planning to shoot it set for America, but shoot it in Australia. And that was where my passion was. But I knew in a heartbeat that COVID was going to make that impossible. It's a period film, it involves travel, all of those reasons. So it's not to say that we have to murder our darlings, but we have to put our darlings on ice. And we have to go into our shoebox and we have to find those films that are contemporary, that have all of the assets that possibly make them more realistic to shoot in the environment that we're in now. So there's innovation in terms of us learning to be more pragmatic in where we choose to place our passions. And then I think on the practical side, we have to, this is not an easy business to set ego aside, but we really do have to set ego aside. And we have come up to think that, for example, the director is the author of the piece once it's in front of the camera, and the director's vision has to pervade every single aspect of every single element of the shoot. It may be now that we have to condense our shoot times, which is kind of what we had to do with This is the Night Mail. And you have to have multiple units running in parallel. And that means that sometimes the director isn't in all places at all times. So there has to be this generosity of spirit to actually fragment the production down into workable units. And the director has to become much more like the conductor of an orchestra. He's not playing the instruments, you know, he's bringing them in. But I think this idea that everyone is the kind of prince of their fiefdom and that departments are sacred is one of the things that has to be rethought.
Yeah, I think you're an example of pivoting right there in the title. As you said, you maybe had a bigger project. No, you're not going to do that one this year because of COVID, but let's get right into a lockdown film. And we'll talk more about your film in a minute. Thank you. Naysun, do you feel like what you're doing at Blazing Griffin is innovative?
Well, I am Scottish, so we're not very good at talking ourselves up. So I'd say the default answer is no, of course not. We're doing everything very normally, and it's very standard. And I think there's maybe an element of I sort of actually do believe that what we're doing is we're making video games, we're making films, we're making TV. We are I suppose in a small way horizontally and vertically integrated in that we've got post-production as well. So there are a lot of companies that do all of those things. There aren't many of our scale. We're still small. We're around 50 people doing those things, and there aren't many who are looking at what story worlds is the way that we put it, and plenty of other people do as well, and trying to think about a world more than or as well as plots and as well as characters, but how can we start something which is going to be fun to play in for a long time? And there are, of course, plenty of companies out there doing that, especially big ones, especially studios. So I'd like to think that as an indie, we're being innovative. We're not looking purely at ways of maximizing ROI by merchandising and licensing lots of things out and kind of fragmenting an IP, but we're looking at ways of how can we build an IP and stay authentic to this world that we're creating by being a kind of creative hub where we can make a video game, where we can make a comic, where we can make a TV show, where we are that kind of that central creativity. So I'd say it's a bit of both. We are doing things that a lot of other people do, but maybe we're joining them together in a way that very few players are at the moment.
Yeah, when did the company launch? And did you launch with all these parts all at once, or have you sort of built and grown?
So there's always a complicated answer to that. There's not one answer, but in this form, we launched coming up for 6 years ago. So we were actually 3 different companies that had all been going for varying length of times, three startups working in post, in film, and in video games. And we decided, actually, we think, we want to make the things that we have always loved to consume ourselves. And a lot of that has been things that are more world-based than they are purely plot-based or story, individual story-based. So we thought, hey, why don't we just try and do this all together? That was 6 years ago.
Okay. Well done. It's still going 6 years later. And
just about, yeah.
And Shola, it's hard to self-diagnose if you're innovative or not, but
I have no problem with that. I'll say yes. I'm Nigerian. We don't have that same issue.
I need some of that.
But I think my approach to it is just kind of it's in a kind of medium agnostic kind of way. If you think of my first film, A Moving Image, was a weird hybrid of documentary fiction, animation, performance art, and photography. So I think I came into it already thinking about fragmentation and with a firm intrigue in doing things differently. And that's really what was a coalescence of all the kind of mediums I'd worked in prior, all kind of coalescing and coming together in this first film, and then taking elements of that into a more, I guess, traditional film in The Last Tree, but still with the ideology of a moving image, the kind of freedom and looseness that was created there. And I like medium hopping, which is why I ended up doing this VR project, Violence. And it's because I take something from each position and I take it back to film, and then and it helps me redirect what I'm doing in that central medium. But the reason why I did the VR was because a lot of my interest in directing are about perspective and subjectivity. It's a different proposition in VR. It's kind of more akin to theatre, I would say, where you kind of have to watch the performance from a more objective standpoint. But in that, create a different type of subjectivity that I was interested in investigating. And it's, for me, it's all about what you take to these mediums and then what you can bring back to the medium you left at the same time.
Yeah, I wanted, maybe I'll just stick with you for a minute, Shola. You know, and even on the sort of production or financing type side, I think I met you around the time you were making A Moving Image. And, you know, you were sort of, you knew the last tree was happening, but instead of sort of waiting around for that to really, the ball to be ready to go and full green light and financed from official sources, I think you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you just sort of kind of made A Moving Image like without any public funding. You just kind of went out and did it rather than wait for the big, slightly bigger, it's not huge money, probably for the last tree, but instead of waiting for the big money, you did something on your own. And, you know, how did you even do that? Did you max out credit cards, or how did you make it?
It's a combination of just looking at crowdfunding was a key part of it. I'd seen a lot of successful campaigns, and I was interested in exploring that. And, you know, I had to work out a few strategies on how you render a crowdfunding in an interesting way. And what you end up doing is you end up creating a lot of the material up front, marketing material, kind of like pre-selling a film in a weird way. And you're doing all the marketing, you're engaging in blogs to engage, you know, share the kind of promo video, and you're building an audience from that point on, from the ground up. And I had a relationship with the National Film and Television School as well, so I was able to utilize a lot of in-kind contributions, which you know were pretty essential to the process. So it was amalgamating those two things. But for me, it's interesting because when you really think of a debut feature, a lot of people, I sometimes feel like even certain filmmakers' debut features aren't really their debuts in a way, because it's still got some form of editorializing that, or development that's pretty much essential to its creation. But it's not, if we're talking about the purest voice, it's not completely unadulterated in a sense. And so for me, it was important to, in A Moving Image, have a project where I was an exec producer. I was financing it, just to see 100% what it looks like, 100% without any kind of external engagement. Also, it's unpitchable film. I mean, it is a concept, as I said. It's, you know, the subject matter is interesting in terms of gentrification of Brixton, but the approach to it was very different to what you would expect from a linear film. So it's, you know, I think I like to sometimes feel like I can specialize in unpitchable films becoming a reality in one way or another. So A Moving Image was perfect for that kind of concept.
Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned that it's on Netflix now. I should also mention, you know, this was not funded by Netflix. You know, did Netflix take it on as part of the deal with The Last Tree?
No, it's completely separate.
Okay, they just like.
I know it's completely separate. I don't even know if they know it's the same director, but it's there.
Cool. I encourage people watching here, go watch both of them back to back. You know, I think they show you as a filmmaker in different ways, but you can, I think, still see a similar artist behind those. So, Joanne, I would like to ask you about your. Obviously, you've produced and written a number of films, but and worked in television, I think, at the BBC and Discovery, so quite experienced. But I guess this summer, you decided you were going to direct your first feature. And you mentioned, you know, you've got, metaphorically, maybe a box of ideas. And was this idea already in that box, or did this idea come up partially inspired by the way we're living right now?
It was a combination of both in a way. One of the good things about starting at the BBC was when I was in my development role there, I would be asked to come up with television or film ideas based on very set criteria. They would say, we have this piece of talent and we owe them a movie. And can it be a detective because we haven't got a good detective movie? And can it be period because period detectives are working? And can it be set in Scotland because BBC of Scotland have got money and we don't? So I was often given a whole bunch of parameters and asked to go away and create something that fitted those parameters. And that was a really great training in terms of being able to adapt to what the market needs. But as you go further down the track, as a writer, I mean, you're so lucky if you get a script optioned or purchased. You don't usually have the luxury of pursuing those ideas that you want to pursue. You basically think, what's selling? What have I got that's in that genre? And, who can I sell it to? And so a couple of things happened is that I have my shoebox that pays the rent, and then I have the shoebox as little as other filmmakers will know that are your unpitchable films, that nobody in their right mind would finance because nobody will see it in the way that you imagine it, but they're still there in the, in your heart. And so I was fortunate that last year I did sell quite a number of screenplays. None of it could then be made in the COVID environment. So when I found myself forced to a standstill, I couldn't really go back and work on those projects, and I really wanted to work on something new. So I thought, to make an opportunity out of catastrophe, I would take this time to work on one of my unpitchable ideas. And out of my many unpitchable ideas, there was one that just had the bones of, in terms of its format, it being contemporary in the way that it could be strung out into different narrative threads that could be shot independently. It just seemed to have the right bones to be shot in a very efficient and kind of skeleton way. And so I decided, I hadn't written the script, but I decided I would take that idea and use the opportunity that I had nobody breathing down my neck for a rewrite on one of the other projects and actually write that one up. So the other aspect was, it's never healthy as a freelancer if you actually have money in the bank. It happens so rarely that when it does happen, my biggest fear is that I'll never write again because I'll be overwhelmed by the prospect of being able to pay my rent for more than 3 months. So I actually had this odd urge to actually get the money out of my bank account. And so I couldn't ask anybody else to invest in this idea, because I knew that it was, way out there and a long shot. So I thought I would, take the money that I'd been lucky enough to earn from the screenplays that were my, day-to-day shoebox and actually invest it in this film. And then in order to, as everybody knows, when you're working on low-budget films, you want to feel that everybody will share in the success, and nobody wants to think that everyone's given their time or equipment at a discounted rate, and then suddenly, you end up with a Blair Witch and somebody runs off with all of the profits. So one of the ways that we could do that was to make a commitment that the profits go to the film and television charity, and that way it was kind of like an even playing field from the start. So long-winded answer, but yes, it was an idea that I had, but it was just one that seemed to have the bones of being workable in a COVID environment.
And what's the elevator pitch? Can you tell us what the idea actually is?
Yeah, I would say it's my pitch line was it's kind of like a Black Mirror feature episode, but with a supernatural twist. And it's a celebration of the gig economy, that these days you can hire anyone to do anything for you. There's an app that can hire anybody to park your car, to wash your clothes or clean your house. And the gig economy is how we live our lives today. But what happens if the person hiring you is dead? Because there are jobs that the dead need doing. And so the dead can hire the living to take care of business that they never got around to taking care of. And like most movies, it starts off, it's just a great gig until you find yourself working for a dead person that may not be all that they seem to be. So it's kind of like a celebration of the gig economy, very much a celebration of London, shot around London to really show London at its best, but encapsulating that kind of supernatural twist. So we've created an entirely new supernatural world in this kind of, everyone's got a side hustle. This is a dark side hustle.
Oh, there's your poster right there, your T-shirt. I love it. Well, it's amazing to see, some people have sat around making sourdough and you've made a film, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not out of the office.
We're getting some great questions in already. I'm really impressed with the interactive level of the audience, and people saying they love Shola's work, and amazing. I'm going to get to some of those in just a minute, but I'll ask just a few more questions, and then we'll start to feed in a lot of those audience questions. Naysun, I would like to ask you about the first line, or the first word in this title of this panel, which is diversify. Because obviously you do, feature films, you have post-production facilities. I'm really interested that the company also works in gaming, because we always hear how much money there is in gaming. And I've always been shocked that filmmakers don't try to cross over more, or there's not more sort of synergies. So can you talk about how you guys work with gaming, and does that fit into the rest of your IP? And yeah, do you see scope for more collaborations?
So I guess last question first. I think there absolutely is scope for more collaborations between film and actually, in particular, television storytelling and video game. But with video games, there's as much diversity within the genre of video games as there are between short films to feature films to television, to all the different formats in television. All that same diversity also exists in video games, and it's just interactive. So I think the way that things can cross over can be very specific, or they can be very broad. Where we have crossed over already, we have brought writers over from television into writing our video games, and I think there's maybe, in our experience, is a clue as to some of the barriers that exist for writers transferring, because it is a very different discipline, a very, very different discipline, and both from what you actually, the actual kind of format of the words that you have to write, in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. In video games, the cutscenes have to be incredibly brief. What a character says has to be very brief, barring a few notable exceptions. But you have to get a lot across in very little time. And I think there'll be writers in film and television who say, well, that's exactly the same with us. Show, don't tell, but it's to even greater extent inside video games. And the other thing is the manner in which you work. It tends to be that writers inside film and television, for the most part, unless they're in a writer's room, it's quite a solitary experience for large stretches of it. There's obviously still interaction, there's still iteration, but it tends to come in 6-week intervals, sometimes 3-month or even 2-year intervals, at the point where you're actually getting some feedback and then diving back in. Whereas in video games, it's rapid. It is, you are part of a team, and it's happening every day, and you go, does this thing work? And the designer or the programmer or the artist or whoever in the team is going, actually, that's not quite fitting there. Can you iterate on it like this? It might mean that a designer comes in and says, well, actually, that really doesn't work. Can you just change the small thing? And for a writer, that's like, well, that picks everything that I've meticulously spent planning for the last month. But it's simply turned out not to be doable in an interactive setting and allow for gameplay to work. So we found that in our experience, whilst it's always eventually worked, there's quite a big cultural shift and technical shift between bringing people over. But that being said, I think there's tremendous opportunity, as we've seen the genre in video games really diversify. There are writers who are interested in building those worlds, who want to create something more than that one linear story. But equally, there's real place for those small and beautiful and authored video games that are really writer-led and director-led, even, where this is a 2-hour experience, it's a 4-hour experience, and whilst it's interactive and it's still got agency inside it, it's still an experience that where you're connecting with a writer in a really meaningful way. And so I think there really is that opportunity, and with and commercially, we're seeing that these kind of games do really, really well when they have that degree of authorship to them. So I think there is, I really encourage writers who are thinking about it that there is that potential there, but you got to know it'll be a gear shift, and not always a fun one.
Yeah. And can I be crass and ask, if you're not working in Grand Theft Auto 62, can you make money in independent games, on a smaller scale? You get paid?
It's not. You get paid. Yeah, absolutely, you get paid. It's not as. It's not what it appears. I think in all those headlines of there are, many billions of dollars flowing about. That the industry is so much bigger than film. Whilst all that is true, from a revenue perspective, it is still tough on the ground for an independent developer, and you got to be nimble. And same as independent film, you've got to look at different funding models. You've got to look at partnerships. You got to look at collaborations. Like, it is still a fight to get what you want made, and that is particularly true when it comes to the things that you want to tell, the stories that you want to tell. Because same as film, you got to go out and pitch, and someone's got to agree to put money into it. So it comes with all of those same risks. Yeah. That being said, the one big difference I would say is if you have a hit, if you connect with your audience, you're much more likely to receive royalties as a result. With film, you can have a hit and you can connect with that audience, and you can have loads of people in a cinema or sell DVDs, and you still might never see anything. And I think it is somewhat simpler to receive that monthly check with video games if it does break out.
Okay, thank you. I just know that, if we're talking about entrepreneurship, you got to know where to pay the bills too. Yes. Yeah, Shola, I wanted to come back to you about your VR project, and just, was that a sort of cultural shift or learning curve for you? Did you enjoy it? Do you think you'll do more?
I'll definitely do more. I mean, the project Violence is really a recontextualization of the word. It's kind of looking at violence through the lens of oppressed groups and state kind of repression, namely through the lens of, say, policing and the prison industrial complex. So the experience really is a black man in a 4x4 white cell, and the sonic refrains that are being said in this situation are quite draconian. They're all about basically knowing your place and not rebelling. But slowly through the experience, that refrain changes to something more attuned to like liberation, in a sense of, say, Malcolm X. And so what we're looking for in the user experience is to see if their ideas about violence and nonviolent protests changed during the experience. And what was really good is that about my approach to it, in a sense, was we had the ability to make it interactive, so you could either engage with the protagonist, we'll just call him for the sake of it. You could engage with the protagonist's plight and potentially be an act of liberation alongside him or not. And we were able to collect all that data. We had an inset questionnaires before and after the experience to gauge whether the user's perception of violence / non-violent protests changed during the experience. We got a lot of good data, and that was cut across race, gender, age, regionality. So that was really interesting data to be able to look at. And really what the experience is as a whole, it launched the Tribeca Arcade at CanXR this year, not so long after the George Floyd protests and all of that stuff that was going on. So it was very salient at that point, seeing the kind of statistics of the amount of people who may have come into the experience with complete negativity towards the idea of violent protest, but that shifted during the experience. And that's, I think, the question you have to ask. Sorry, did you say again? Did someone say something? No.
Somebody said something somewhere, but it wasn't us.
Oh, what was it? It was a ghost. We'll go with it.
Joanne,
so
contact us. Oh my God. Anyway, Shola, please.
All right, I'll go. So yeah, I think the question you have to ask yourself is when engaging. Oh, okay.
Should I be muted? Where? What Zoom?
I don't know. Somebody in the tech team might have a microphone on.
Yeah, so just
or
need to wait.
Coming in for later or something. Can whoever is talking yourself? Okay, try again, Shola.
Basically, what I was going to say was that you have to know why it's VR or why you're working in that medium. And for me, the reason why because thematically it's tied to the work that I'm engaged with in cinema. It's about identity and it's about systems. But the reason why this project felt like I could explore it the best in VR was the interactivity and the ability to get that data and to see, analyze people's empathy and perception in the experience. And I feel like this was just really the first of many projects where I'll get to continue the kind of research and investigation that I'm doing in VR.
Yeah, I like what you said at the opening too, that you can, you go away from traditional film, you do something like VR, but maybe that informs how you write your next film or how you work on a TV script. Do you think that's experience can shape you?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's like some osmosis definitely going on there. It's basically, it was represented in the moving image. It was really a convergence of such different elements that made it really interesting when I approached The Last Tree, which was meant to be quote unquote more traditional. But I took so much from that kind of medium agnostic approach in the first film that it made the visual language and the aesthetic in The Last Tree interesting in a different way, even if it was in the more traditional context. And to then go into a VR project to expand on that, it's very useful to then take what I learned from the experience of making violence back to whatever the next feature film I'm working on.
Cool. And Naysun, do you guys do any VR?
We haven't, not up to this point, but it's something that we've been obviously following really closely for years and years now, and we've got VR kit in the office, not that people have been in for the last few months, but it's something actually, particularly as a result of lockdown, we've taken a much closer look at, just that idea of kind of connection and experience. For us, because we are very commercially led, it's always been, well, where's the money? To a certain extent anyway. But now there's kind of a bigger question. Now there's a bigger question of like, but also is this, is it time to really push into that area to just allow us to have experiences beyond what we can achieve in these four walls and increase that feeling of connection. And I think what you're saying about empathy and how you can put yourself in other people's shoes and how you can revisit what you are thinking or kind of deep held beliefs is a really powerful part of VR. And I think that's ever more important at the moment. So yeah, it's an area that we've got a few things bubbling.
Cool. I'm going to delve into a few of these audience questions because they're really interesting. Matt Fellers is asking, could the future of film exist in real time? Could we have a live film or live cinema? Does that terrify you a little bit? Yeah. There's Matt's question. I mean, I know Woody Harrelson shot a film in real time, but then I don't think, did they release it live? They might have streamed it. I'm not sure. Joanne, what do you think?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, even if you go back to the 1950s, they would often shoot the season finale to soap operas live. So, that was back in the day where nobody could miss their mark and everything else. I think one of the challenges that we have is we can always come up with incredibly creative solutions, but whenever they require research and development, the question has to be who's going to pay for it. So if I would say it would be incredibly exciting, the kind of like prospect of doing a live movie. I think we can all think the editorial that would come around it and the sense of newness. But on the one hand, situations that we're in now, I find it drives creativity amongst the filmmakers who are coming up with solutions and everything else. But at some point, when you then turn around and say, hey, I've got 20 good ideas of responding to filmmaking in COVID, you come back to the doorstep of the money of somebody saying, yeah, well, I don't want to be the first to invest in it. If somebody else does the first one that works, I'll be there. So the appetite for adventure has to be shared by the financing sources as much as it is by the filmmakers.
And yeah, I should mention an example. This summer was The Third Day. And God, was that BBC or Channel 4? I'm going to get in trouble.
I think it was Sky.
Oh, yeah, Sky.
I think it was Sky.
Yes. Sorry. But yeah, they did a sort of traditional, I think it was 4 parts. It was really interesting. And then they did a live day where you're sort of following the cast around for 10 hours. I didn't do it, but watch it. But I think I know people who did it said it was quite transcendent. So yeah, there's some people maybe looking into that idea. Shola, are you interested? Directing a live film?
I think it's the trying to identify the parameters of what that really is. And when you think of them, there are a lot of cool theatre companies doing kind of performances that are amalgamation of mediums, and you have live elements mixed with pre-recorded elements. And so this feels like a kind of logical extension of that. I think what I'm more interested in personally is kind of how it affects the making of the film, in the sense that how technology and the ability to see live renders and design sets that are completely digital and have actors perform in the sets and see the full render while you're making. I'm very much interested in that element of I guess a kind of live performance.
Yeah. And Naysun, have you guys done any live events or live recordings?
We filmed live events.
Yeah.
we did a big concert last 2 years ago now. It was Run Rig's last concert, but I don't think that's quite the future of film. That's just a big OB, which was a lot of fun. And I think rather than saying maybe that, I think that the future of film rests in live kind of live filmmaking. Maybe it's a future or part of a future. In that I think we'll continue to see a bit of a proliferation as people are hungry for things like theatre but aren't necessarily getting it. As we're like, how do we shoot in a really short space of time because we don't have money? Well, can we shoot as live, and things like that? If it's a response to a demand or a necessity, I could see it being that responding. Probably not an area that we're massively looking at the moment. I could see it forming part of something.
Yeah, it could be a way to get people in cinemas for a night as well when they're reopened. We've got another great question. This is from Mark Booth, who I assume is our famed producer friend at B3. So Mark is asking, has lockdown changed you as a filmmaker or storyteller? Have you been creative during the pandemic? Well, we know one of you has. How have you been able to be creative during a strange year? Naysun, how has the company, responded to the pandemic? Are you going to tell happier stories now?
That's you know what, you're not wrong. We're doing our first rom-com, and that is a big difference for us. We're mostly genre, and it's sort of a genre film, but I think hopeful films, it's always something we wanted. We kind of pride ourselves in doing. Like, we've always wanted hope to be part of our films, even if they're dark. But I would say we also kind of want people to feel good, and we want to, we've been thinking more about that kind of notion of connection and how people can feel connected through watching something, through being a part of something that they're interacting with. So that's one element. But the other thing is, I especially early on in lockdown, I did have more time to be personally creative. And and I'm not a writer, very much a producer, and well, run the company, but I am actually in the process of selling the first show that I created myself to a studio. So that's quite a nice side effect that honestly would never have happened if not for lockdown. So yeah, some
That's great. Yeah. Shola, have you been writing a lot, or editing, or revising?
Yeah,
What have you been doing?
mainly writing, but the one event that I felt was really particularly creative was obviously Cannes was cancelled this year in terms of exhibition, but CanXR, the exhibition of the VR piece Violence happened in the virtual exhibition at this place, the Museum of Imaginarium. It's a digital exhibition. And so what was interesting was recontextualizing how the project would be consumed. And you imagined it initially as a head piece in a space that people physically were at. It was very interesting. That has restrictions in the sense of where it is in the world, who has access to that space, who's at the festival, etc., etc. What was interesting was seeing it recontextualized in a virtual exhibition with all of the pieces and people from around the world being able to engage with all of the VR pieces in this virtual exhibition. So that was quite, for me, a very clever reinterpretation of a lockdown situation and the exhibition and VR experience.
Cool. And have you been writing other stuff? Have you been working on your TV scripts, or what have you else have you been doing?
A lot of writing, definitely.
There's no excuse not to sit home and write now. That's the problem.
There really is.
And Joanne, you've mentioned your film, and I would love to hear a little bit more about how I think you shot it in something like 9 days of shoot, or how did you actually produce it safely?
Well, one of the things the most obvious thing that struck me about working within the COVID environment was that the length of the shoot was our biggest enemy, because you can keep people disciplined and safe and observing COVID guidelines, but human beings are human beings. And if it goes on week after week, then it becomes increasingly more difficult to, hold people to good practice. So my first ambition was to try and think, well, what is the shortest amount of time that I can actually shoot this in? And it being, my first film as a director. And so one of the reasons why I chose the idea that I did and kind of fleshed it out as the screenplay to shoot in COVID is because it's one that has a series of narrative threads that gradually start to intertwine. But the beauty of individual narrative threads is that you can bubble them as discrete shoots, and you don't have much until the storylines start to overlap. You don't have overlap of actors. So it was a combination of number one, finding a location which was incredibly diverse and flexible. So we were very lucky. We worked with there's a community called the Tile Yard in King's Cross. So this is my shout out to the Tile Yard. And it is a creative collective. There's fashion, music, audio companies there. But they have a large amount of derelict areas with old abattoir freezers and just a lot of different environments. So we were able to basically contain the shoot to that environment using the built-up areas, the very kind of like high-end office and courtyards when we needed that, and then using the railway arches and everything else. So we could make the shoot safe. And that obviously meant rewriting the scripts, so you have the script like we all do, and then you go and find the location and you say, okay, now we have to set it on a boat, whatever it is that you have to do. So I would say at least 50% of the script I had to rewrite to fit the location that we had. We never had railway arches in it. We never had railway lines in it, but suddenly, we did. So we adapted it to be within a location, and being contained within that location then allowed us to maintain good practice within an environment that was under our control. The second thing was, as I said, is it was a storyline that is really like an anthology of stories until the threads start to overlap. So I had a co-director. I was very lucky. My co-director is my usual directing partner. So we co-write, I produce, he directs. But this time around, it was going to be me taking the lead as director. But I could trust him as co-director to take certain of those units. And even though we might only be 400 yards apart, I'll be shooting in one area of the tile yard. There would be another shoot in another part. We had our Teradek links. So I, as a director, didn't have to leave my set. And if I did have to leave the set, I would just have to run 400 yards, check on something, tweak the performance, and then run back. And we actually ended up with 3 units. So we kind of ended up, I guess you could say, with like a 27-day shoot contained into 9 days. There's that combination of multiple unit shooting and rewriting the story to fit within a very controllable environment. And I'm not underestimating how easy it is to replicate those circumstances, but the principle remains the same. Rewrite the script to fit the location. And as I say, kind of like have that step down from ego to think, I may have to have 1 or 2 other directors working with me. And as long as there's a clear finishing point, somebody has the creative vision and you have 2 other directors that are willing to work to that creative direction, then you can achieve an enormous. So we have, a full 90-minute feature that we shot in 9 days. And we shot on 3 units of Arri Alexas, top grade stuff, 3 gaffers, 3 grip crews, everything. The other good thing is I lost my COVID weight because I was just constantly running between units. I crack walnuts with my thighs now, and I've never finished the film. So,
wow. That's a really smart way to do it. Yeah. And the story has nothing to do with this pandemic or any pandemic or COVID. It's just, it's not mentioned.
No. Yeah. I think there will be, in the future, there's going to be some brilliant films about COVID. But I think also we're going to be surprised at how quickly it becomes a moment in time. I think we're going to be astonished at how we look back. And let's be honest, we've already forgotten about Brexit, and we thought that was a thing of our generation. So I think we'll be very surprised at how this just becomes a weird moment in time, like, Bay of Pigs, something like that resonates forever, but was there and gone. So I didn't want to make the film tied to it forever in that way.
Another question coming in from Sam Jones, who is saying, do you have any past projects that you wish you could have made more innovative or pivoted more with? Do you have some boring projects in your closet that you wish you'd been more radical with? Oh, hindsight's everything, Sam. Naysun, can you think of anything that you've worked with that you wish had been a bit riskier or something?
Yes, sort of. Actually, so our film "And in the Apocalypse" is a zombie Christmas musical. So in and of itself, just as a film, is quite a big mashup. One of the things that we explored early on was just diving into doing a video game companion at the same time and self-releasing, with innovative gameplay that would resonate with the themes of the film, to do with relationship and friendship management at the same time as being inside the zombie apocalypse and following a different set of friends that were going through the same thing in real time at the same time as the events in the film, but following a different set of characters. And there were probably bad reasons why we just never got it off the ground. We got so distracted with a lot of things. And then it turned out there's probably good reasons in retrospect that it was good that we didn't do it then, and there may be hopefully an opportunity to do it in the future. So yeah, but there's a big part of me that kind of wishes we'd just done that. It would have been a lot of fun to kind of stay in that world, and I really loved the pitch that we came up with. And you get distracted. You always got something else to do. So yeah, that would have been nice. That would have been cool.
I mean, making an independent film is a huge hurdle on its own. So don't beat yourself up. You didn't do other things at the same time. Shola, do you look back and see a project that you wish had been more radical or risk taking?
No, not really.
Well, you've taken the risk. It's fine.
Yeah.
I would like to confess, though, to actually just a lesson from my own past on a major regret that I have that isn't exactly in this field. We were making the movie Mind Gamers, and it was about the interface between quantum mechanics and human consciousness. So, a comedy. No, it was a science fiction, and it was basically just all about the quantum premise of multiple simultaneous realities. All of the stuff that the Higgs boson was kind of like proving at the time. So our initial inspiration for the film was to have a film that, a little bit like they later on did with Bandersnatch, that had constant multiple outcomes. And, we came up with the idea, we wrote the script, and we got very excited about it. And then we got bogged down in the technicalities of it. And at the time I was working for Red Bull, and they had access to all the technology you could possibly imagine. It would have been better if they hadn't. If I'd been an independent filmmaker and trying to make this work, with a clockwork radio, I might have stayed with it. I got overwhelmed by possibility because there wasn't any technology that we couldn't use. And I allowed myself to become overwhelmed. So in the end, we ended up making a film which just has like a linear structure, but with, twists and turns and everything else, but it simply didn't work. And really what we should have done is, there's an idea is only expressed. And so I lost my nerve. I defaulted back into trying to do the same thing, and it didn't work. Should have just junked it and just moved on to something else. But when you've invested like a year and a half in something, you think, no, we can make this work. And I look back now and, the film is beautifully shot and it's got some great set pieces, but you can't smoke that film into making it. So my lesson there was, either stay with it, but don't go halfway, don't compromise, don't try and innovate a little bit. Go big or go home.
Good advice. Thank you. I'm going to ask one more audience question, at least. This is mostly for Naysun. This is from Kehinde Adeyemi, who is asking, what advice do you have for filmmakers who think that their scripts could be turned into novels, graphic novels, animated projects, games? How do people start thinking about these other possibilities, I guess?
I think it very much depends on where you're at as a writer. I think if you are, if you've got a certain status within the film or TV industry, approaching, either yourself or through an agent, and being like, look, I've established myself here. I'm really interested in moving into another medium, and going to some of those companies out there who are making their name in being able to do kind of cross-platform, making cross-platform plays. It's not easy, but it's definitely possible. I think if you are at an early stage in your career, it's about finding the people to do it with you. And I'm a real believer in collaboration. And I think COVID has, if anything, increased the amount of collaboration that we have to do in order to get things made. We're certainly finding that now. Finding that, you'd be surprised about the people who are looking for, who really need this kind of thing. That small independent games company who's like, we're great at game mechanics, we're great at level design, we're great at gameplay loops, but what we really need is we really need a great story, and that's just not what we have. So it's about, getting to say it's hard during COVID, but getting to those events now that they're virtual. It's about meeting people. It's about putting yourself out there, and sometimes it's about doing it. If you think it'd be a great novel, write the novel. If you think it would be a great graphic novel, then write the graphic novel. Find that artist online who you believe in. Like it's just about doing. it is easier said than done, but I think if you're at the start of your career, then it kind of rests on doing a lot yourself, or finding those partners who are really hungry for what you've got.
Yeah, it's finding the right partners who trust you, believe in your vision. I think some of the usual things that apply in film as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've got a VR question from Bhavana Viparthi, who is asking, maybe for Shola, be a good one. Do you think VR will be more democratic, be more accessible in the future? I mean, there's Google Cardboard, but does it feel like VR can be more widely viewed?
I think it's gonna. I mean, God, let's hope so. It's gonna have to, if it's gonna emerge as something that's that we're all engaging with in a more consistent way. Part of my intrigue in making this project was down to the lack of, I felt, diversity in VR and engagement in VR from people from particular communities, and then therefore that reflects in the content too. So me making this project was very much me kind of as an extension in film, trying to paint my perspective and ideology across in a medium where I wasn't sure it was quite vibrant as of yet. But there's technical prohibitions around VR as well as kind of cultural ones, and I think the technology becoming democratized through costs. That's going to be the key element. How many people have the headsets? How accessible are the headsets? I think the medium has bags of potential, and certainly it's a completely different thing to cinema, which is what excited me about it. It felt very much like, in a way, sometimes with film you can kind of feel like that we're saturated with the same movies, but you can kind of feel like you're at a plateau sometimes. And innovation really is something that has to be excavated to really exist in the medium. Whereas VR felt very fresh and like the Wild West, and it's a place where you could really. I mean, every step you kind of take in that medium is a form of innovation because it's so not well trodden at this stage.
Yeah, a lot of potential there, I think. We have to start wrapping up on time, but I just wanted to try to end, even in 2020, I like to end on a positive note, even in a year that's not always positive, to say the least. We're here at the Future of Film Summit. What excites you about, we don't have to say film, the future of storytelling? And for me, I think there's so many formats we can work in. And I think we're seeing people trust new voices. I mean, I look at something like I Made a Story, and then the BBC, just seeing Michaela Cole's vision feels pretty true to her as an auteur, straight on my TV. I like that. I don't know if that would have happened 10 years ago at the BBC. So yeah, what's exciting you? What's giving you hope? Joanne?
I think what's giving me hope is that this has been a reset in so many ways, and I think that we're very privileged if we work in the film industry as storytellers or whatever. But I would also say that over the years we've become a little bit set in our ways and certain hierarchies which can't be challenged. And I think that the great thing about this break down all sorts of walls. And I would say that working on this, on the film set of This Is the Nightmare, I've never experienced a time where there was no ego from the heads of department. I never once had any griping about overtime or anything of that sort, because we were at war. We were at war just to get this film made. And I had so many people at the end of it tell me that it was the most fun that they've had on a film set. So I'm hoping that what will come out of this is just a little bit of reset on the ego button. That directors have to collaborate. We might not be the only director on set, and everyone just has to get out of their own way a little bit more. And I'm hopeful that'll be a benefit going forward.
Great. That's hopeful. Naysun, what are you hopeful about, excited about?
I am excited that there has never been such a demand for content, and it has increased so massively, and it has never been more difficult to produce. So that means there is going to be such a degree of innovation, and there's also going to be, there is, even just in Scotland on a real basic level, there's such a demand for crews right now that we're forced to train far more new crew. We're forced to let people in who've never been inside that clique of filmmaking before. People are having to take chances. That word democratization, I think all of this disruption right now, as negative as it is forcing us to basically let more people into the club, and take chances on people, and take chances on creators, because that's supply and demand. And I think that is a hugely positive thing, and it's come at a time when there is now such a focus on diverse voices and underrepresented voices that is far overdue, that those two things dovetailing presents a really exciting opportunity. I think that's very hopeful for that.
Great. Shola, you get the last word. What are you excited about?
Pie. No, I wanted that to be the last word. I was like, no, we can't let that be the last one. No, what I'm genuinely excited about, other than pie, is the continued collapse between the boundaries of these mediums. I'm excited about VR reaching the space and its effect on cinema. I'm excited about gamings, the gamification of film, or the filmification of game. I'm excited about these borders collapsing, because I think that's what's going to lead to the new drug. It's the new thing that we're all excited about, new cinema in a way. And I think we all love a good story told well, but I think we all respect a good story told well with a degree of innovation, even more better.
What a perfect note to end on. You're all really amazing and creative, and thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you to the audience for some great questions. Sorry we didn't get to all of them, but that just shows how interesting these people are. We could talk to them for hours, but the summit continues. I think we're going to hand back to Alex now, but a big thank you to our guests. Fascinating. Keep up the creativity, even in 2020. Thank you.